Case file. Missing persons. Report number 741-B. Date of filing. The 14th of March. Timestamp. 09:17 hours. The family had last been seen the day before. That is the first thing the record shows. Not the last. The first. A 31-hour gap between the final confirmed sighting and the moment anyone in an official capacity wrote anything down. 31 hours. In those hours, a phone was pinged by a tower 63 kilometers north of this address. In those hours, a fuel receipt was generated and left unclaimed at a service station on the A road toward the valley. In those hours, a neighbor made 2 calls to the non-emergency line. The record does not mention the calls. There is a field on page 1 of the report, beneath the case classification header, that reads, "Witnesses reported at time of filing." The box beside it is checked. Beside the checked box, a single word has been typed: none. The neighbor's number appears in the dispatch log from the day before. It appears twice. The first entry is timestamped 11:47. The second, 14:15. Neither entry links to case file 741-B. Neither entry was marked resolved. Neither entry was assigned to an officer. The record shows a family went missing. What it does not show is that the system knew something was wrong before it filed the paperwork to say so. That gap is what this file is about. The official record describes them in the way that official records do. David Calloway, 41, listed occupation, logistics coordinator, married, 2 dependents, resident at the address for 6 years, vehicle registered in his name, a dark gray estate, 2019 registration, partial plate noted in a later entry as beginning with the letters HV. Sarah Calloway, 38. Occupation listed as administrative assistant, part-time. Listed as cohabitant. The children, Maisie, 9, and Thomas, 6. Listed under additional occupants. That is how they appear in the first 3 pages of the file. Logical units in a reportable event. Ages, occupations, addresses, vehicle registration. The record does not contain the fact that Maisie had a piano recital scheduled for the following Saturday. She had been practicing a piece by Schumann for 11 weeks. Her teacher confirmed this when contacted independently, 6 days after the family disappeared. The record does not contain the fact that Thomas had a library book due for return. It was still on his bedside table when investigators entered the property on day 4. The overdue notice arrived by post on day 9. David Calloway left the porch light on every night. It had been on for 4 days straight before anyone formally noted the address as a site of concern. These are not details the file holds. They are details the file was never designed to hold. The file was designed for logistics, and logistics, as it turned out, was not sufficient. At 6:14 on the 13th of March, a traffic camera captured the Calloway vehicle at the junction of Birch Lane and the A road heading north. David Calloway is visible in the driver's seat. The image is low resolution. No passengers can be confirmed from the footage, though the rear of the vehicle appears laden. At 7:52, David Calloway's mobile phone pinged a cell tower at the service station on Moorfield Road, 4.7 kilometers north of the family home. A fuel receipt timestamped 7:54 was generated at Pump 3. The receipt was paid by card. It was later recovered from the station's records. The card belonged to David Calloway. At 11:47, a call was placed from a number registered to a resident of the adjacent property. The call was received by the non-emergency dispatch service. The call lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. The neighbor's name is Patricia Renner. She had lived next door to the Calloways for 3 years. She is not mentioned anywhere in the initial movement log. The movement log runs to 6 pages. It accounts for the traffic camera, the fuel receipt, the phone ping. It accounts for a supermarket CCTV frame, timestamped the evening before, in which David Calloway is visible collecting groceries. It accounts for a neighbor 2 streets away who reported seeing the Calloway children in the front garden on the afternoon of the 12th. It does not account for Patricia Renner's call. It does not account for what she saw. At approximately 14:15, Patricia Renner called again. The Calloway vehicle had not returned. The porch light was on. The movement log ends at 7:54. The dispatch log entry at 11:47 reads as follows. Caller reports neighboring property loading vehicle. States activity appeared unusual. No specific threat indicated. Callback window assigned 4 to 6 hours. Classification assigned non-urgent. The callback did not happen within 4 to 6 hours. There is no entry in the log indicating the callback happened at all. The 4 to 6 hour window came and went without documentation of any contact attempt. The officer assigned to the callback queue that afternoon handled 11 calls between noon and 1800 hours. Patricia Renner's call is not among the 11 records. The second call, logged at 14:15, was received by a different operator. The entry reads, repeat caller, same property, no new information offered. It was flagged for review and assigned to a secondary queue. The secondary queue was cleared at the end of the shift. There is no record of what clearance meant in operational terms. The entry was not transferred to the primary missing persons intake. It was not linked to any subsequent investigation when the report was formally filed the following morning. The first institutional failure is this: a call classification protocol in use at the time sorted incoming non-emergency calls into two categories. Category 1, immediate welfare concern. Category 2, dispute or nuisance. A call describing unusual loading activity at a neighboring property, absent a specific statement of threat, was categorized as a potential neighbor dispute. This was not an error by the operator. The operator followed the protocol correctly. The protocol did not contain a third category. There was no mechanism for logging an observation, a person watching something unfold and calling it in before they could name exactly what it was, as anything other than a dispute or a non-concern. What Patricia Renner had seen did not fit the form, so the form absorbed it as noise. The protocol was reviewed 18 months after this case closed. The review report noted that the binary classification system had been identified as a potential gap by an internal audit 2 years prior. The audit recommendation had not been implemented. That recommendation was filed in a separate administrative record. It is not cross-referenced in Case File 741-B. A missing persons investigation was formally opened on the morning of the 14th of March, at 09:17, following a welfare check request from David Calloway's employer, who had been unable to reach him for 2 consecutive workdays. The first search assets were not deployed until the 16th. Day 3. The operational log documents the deployment precisely. 2 ground search teams, 1 canine unit, 1 aerial asset operating under visual flight conditions. Grid coordinates assigned to the primary search zone spanned a 6-kilometer radius from the family home, oriented primarily south and east, following the most frequently traveled routes from the address as determined by analyzing the family's documented movement history. The movement history analyzed was the internal record, the fuel receipt, the traffic camera, the cell tower ping at Moorfield Road, which sat at the northern boundary of the search grid. The grid did not extend further north. Patricia Renner had told the dispatcher on the morning of the 13th, 4 minutes and 22 seconds of recorded conversation, that the Calloway vehicle had been loaded and had departed heading north. She had watched it go. She had noted the hazard lights activated briefly as it turned onto the access road. She lived next to that access road. She had watched that road every morning for 3 years. She knew the direction. The access road runs north. The primary search grid was oriented south and east. On day 11, the search parameters were formally expanded following a case review. The expansion included, for the first time, the northern corridor. The operational note justifying the expansion cited a review of all available witness information. It did not specify which witness information had newly been reviewed. The search team was briefed on the access road on day 11. They located the first piece of physical evidence consistent with the Calloway vehicle's passage, a tire impression in soft ground at a roadside rest point, on day 12. The access road had been there the whole time, so had the record of the call. Patricia Renner's formal statement entered the investigative record on day 4 of the active investigation. It was not taken by a member of the primary investigation team. It was collected by a community liaison officer conducting a standard door-to-door canvass of the surrounding area. The statement was filed as a supplementary document. It was stamped, logged, and placed in the appendix of the evidence register. It was not flagged for review by the lead investigator until day 8, when a junior officer conducting a file audit noted that the statement contained directional information that did not appear to have been cross-referenced against the search grid. The statement examined against what was already known. Patricia Renner stated that she observed David Calloway and a woman she believed to be Sarah Calloway loading the vehicle beginning at approximately 10:30 in the morning. She described the process as extended, lasting more than 30 minutes. She noted the vehicle appeared heavily laden when it departed. She stated the departure occurred at approximately 11:20, which she confirmed by reference to a recurring television program that had just begun when she moved to make her call. Vehicle color, dark gray, confirmed by the traffic camera image captured at 6:14. Direction of departure, northbound, onto the access road. Confirmed by a cell tower ping recorded at 11:34 at a mast located 7 kilometers north of the address. The ping had been in the file since day 2. It had not been mapped against the witness's directional statement. Hazard lights briefly activated at the access road junction, unconfirmed by camera evidence. However, consistent with a roadside rest point identified by the search team on day 12, located 8 kilometers north, at a point where the road narrows and a levee sits on the western verge. A levee at which, in poor road conditions, hazard lights would be a reasonable precaution. The correlation between the hazard light observation and the levee location was not drawn during the investigation. It was drawn during the subsequent review board proceedings by the review board itself. The finding appears on page 44 of the review report. The review was conducted 15 months after the case closed. The chain of institutional decisions in this case does not trace to a single point of failure. It traces to 5. Each is documented. Each in isolation can be explained. Taken together, they form something that cannot be explained away. Decision 1. The dispatch operator who received the 11:47 call classified it as a non-urgent potential dispute. The operator had no third classification available. The protocol did not provide one. The operator followed procedure. Decision 2. The assigned officer did not complete the callback within the 4 to 6 hour window. The log does not record why. There is no documentation of any operational reason, no surge event, no priority redirect, no supervisor authorization to defer. The callback simply did not occur. No explanation was filed. Decision 3. The second call at 14:15 was received, logged, and marked for review. It was not cross-linked to the first call. The operator who received it did not have access to, or did not access the earlier log entry. The 2 calls from the same address, from the same person, about the same property on the same day, were processed as separate unrelated events. Decision 4. When the missing persons report was filed on the morning of the 14th, the intake officer did not conduct a search of the non-emergency dispatch log for prior contacts related to the address. This search was not a required step in the intake protocol. Decision 5. The search grid was constructed without reference to witness testimony, because the witness testimony had not been formally entered into the investigative record at the time the grid was designed. It was entered on day 4. The grid was not revised until day 11. Each decision-maker had access to part of the picture. None had access to all of it. The system had not been built to assemble the parts. At every step, what Patricia Renner had already said was sitting somewhere in the record. It simply was not where anyone thought to look. The Calloway family was located on the 27th of March, 14 days after they were last confirmed at their home address. They were found at a property 63 kilometers north of their registered address, a location consistent in direction and approximate distance with the route established by the 6:14 traffic camera, the 7:54 fuel receipt, the 11:34 cell tower ping, and the directional information provided by Patricia Renner in her 11:47 call on the 13th of March. The family were alive. The specific circumstances of what had taken place during those 14 days are recorded in a separate case file. That file is not the subject of this record. What this record concerns is what the witness said when she said it and what happened when it was measured against the outcome. Patricia Renner stated the vehicle departed heading north at approximately 11:20 on the 13th. The vehicle's northbound path was confirmed by evidence that had been in the file from day 2. The directional statement was accurate. Patricia Renner described the vehicle as heavily laden. Investigators confirmed, upon locating the property, that the family had arrived with a significant quantity of personal belongings. The statement was accurate. Patricia Renner described the hazard lights activating at the access road junction. The rest point consistent with that behavior was located 8 kilometers north. The statement was consistent with the physical evidence. The search grid, had it been constructed to include the northern corridor from day 1, would have reached the first physical evidence point, the tire impression in the lobby, on day 2 or day 3. The property at which the family was found lay a further 55 kilometers along the same road. The family was found on day 14. The difference between the search grid as constructed and the search grid as Patricia Renner's account required is 11 days. That figure is documented. It is not editorialized. It is the arithmetic of what the file contains. A formal review board convened 7 months after the case closed. Its remit was to examine the institutional handling of incoming witness information during the initial 72 hours of the investigation. The board's findings, as entered into the public summary, the non-emergency dispatch classification protocol was found to contain a systemic gap in the handling of observational calls in which a member of the public reported something they had witnessed but could not categorize as an immediate threat. The board recommended a third classification be created. The recommendation was accepted in principle. The failure to complete the documented callback was noted. The board found that the absence of any documented reason for the missed callback made it impossible to determine whether the failure was procedural, operational, or individual. No individual was cited. The finding was logged as a systemic audit gap. The disconnection between the 2 dispatch calls was found to reflect a known limitation in the logging software in use at the time. A software update addressing cross-referencing capability had been scheduled for implementation the following quarter. The failure to search the dispatch log during the missing persons intake was found to reflect a gap in the intake protocol. A protocol amendment was recommended. The delay in entering Patricia Renner's statement into the main investigative record, received on day 1, entered on day 4, was noted. The board found this reflected resource constraints on the community liaison function during the initial search phase. What the board did not find: that any individual acted in bad faith. What the board did not find: that the outcome would necessarily have been different. What the board did not address: the fact that every element of the failure had been flagged in prior internal audits, in some form, before this case occurred. Patricia Renner's 2 calls to the non-emergency line, the first at 11:47, the second at 14:15, both made on the day the family disappeared, appear in the board's final report as follows. 2 prior contacts with dispatch were identified, the content of which was later found to be consistent with the direction and nature of the family's movements. That is the official account of what she said. Case file 741-B. Closed. Date of closure: the 9th of April. Reason for closure: subjects located. No further active investigation required. Current status: archived. Available for review upon formal request. Patricia Renner still lives next door to the address on the left side of the case file header. The Calloway family has not returned to that address. The porch light, a community liaison officer noted in a visit conducted 3 weeks after the case closed, had finally been switched off. It had been on for 16 days. The dispatch log from the 13th of March is archived in a separate system. It is not attached to case file 741-B. Can be accessed, but only if you know to look for it in a different place. The final line of the official record regarding Patricia Renner's role in this case reads, "Statement corroborated by subsequent evidence. Patricia Renner appeared before the review board on the 2nd of October. At the end of her statement to the board, she was asked if there was anything she wished to add to the record. She said 7 words. I called. I called again. No one came. The board thanked her for her time. The session was concluded. The 7 words appear in the transcript of proceedings, which is filed separately from the review board's published summary. In the published summary, her contribution is described as witness cooperation throughout the investigative process. The distance between what she said and how it was recorded is not a footnote. It is the whole story. This has been the last witness frame. The case file is closed. The record remains.